Hey, true crime aficionados and fellow thrill-seekers. Before we plunge into the unsettling depths of the story, do me a solid. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss a single chilling detail of the terror that gripped America. Now settle in, dim the lights, and prepare yourselves. What you are about to read is a fictional account, yet it draws its power from the very real anxieties that sometimes plague our sense of security. This is the story of the Heartland Butcher, a phantom who carved a swathe of fear across the seemingly tranquil landscapes of the American Midwest. It's a narrative that unravels over time, connecting the dots of escalating horror and forcing us to confront the darkness that can lurk just beneath the surface of everyday life. The late autumn air in Meadow Creek, Iowa, usually carried the comforting scent of burning leaves and the distant lowing of cattle. But on the morning of October 23, 2007, it was thick with something else, a cold, prickling fear. It started with a whisper, then grew into a murmur, and by noon, it was a full-blown scream echoing through the sleepy town. The body of Sarah Jenkins, a 24-year-old librarian known for her quiet demeanor and her love of vintage novels, was discovered in the secluded walking trails of the Meadow Creek State Park. Her car, a beat-up Ford Focus, was still in the parking lot, but Sarah was found nearly a mile deep into the woods, artfully positioned on a moss-covered boulder, her pale skin stark against the autumnal hues. The medical examiner, a seasoned veteran named Dr. Eleanor Vance, who had seen her share of farming accidents and small-town squabbles, arrived on the scene with a grim expression that tightened further with each observation. What struck Dr. Vance, and later the lead detective assigned to the case, Detective Marcus Thorne, was the meticulousness. Sarah hadn't been haphazardly dumped. Her long auburn hair, usually a wild cascade, was carefully fanned out around her head. Her simple cotton dress, though slightly torn, was draped with an almost artistic precision. There were no signs of a struggle, no frantic scratching in the dirt, no overturned leaves, no broken branches. It was as if she had walked there, lain down, and simply ceased to be. The cause of death was a single, precise stab wound to the heart. Clean, efficient. But it was the other details that sent shivers down Thorne's spine. A small, handcrafted wooden bird, carved with exquisite detail, was placed gently in her clasped hands. Its wings were outstretched, as if in flight. And beside the bird, a single, perfectly pressed scarlet maple leaf. Meadow Creek was a town where everyone knew everyone, and a violent death was as rare as a blizzard in July. The initial reaction was shock, quickly followed by a desperate scramble for answers. The local sheriff, Dale Peterson, a man whose biggest concern until now had been rogue teenagers and the occasional lost dog, was out of his depth. He immediately called in the state police, and that's how Detective Marcus Thorne found himself driving through endless cornfields, leaving behind the bustling anonymity of Des Moines for the suffocating intimacy of a small town in crisis. Thorne was a man of quiet intensity, his dark eyes missing nothing. He had a reputation for dogged persistence and an almost intuitive understanding of the criminal mind. But even he felt the unusual weight of this case. The lack of struggle, the artistic presentation, the bizarre artifacts, it all pointed to something more than a random act of violence. It suggested a premeditated, almost ritualistic act. The initial investigation focused on Sarah's life. Was she involved in anything illicit? Did she have enemies? Her colleagues at the library described her as sweet, reserved, a creature of habit. Her small, tidy apartment held no secrets, no hidden lovers, no suspicious correspondence. Her phone records revealed only calls to her elderly parents in Cedar Rapids and a handful of friends. There was no disgruntled ex-boyfriend, no financial woes. Sarah Jenkins was, by all accounts, an ordinary, good-hearted young woman living an ordinary, good-hearted life. And that made her death all the more terrifying. The town, gripped by a fear it had never known, began to turn inward. Neighbors eyed neighbors with a newfound suspicion. Parents walked their children to school, holding their hands tighter than usual. The once tranquil walking trails of Meadow Creek State Park became deserted, a silent testament to the encroaching shadow. A week later, the whispers intensified. Then they turned to screams again. This time, it was 28-year-old Mark Miller, a popular high school football coach and a pillar of the community, found in an abandoned barn on the outskirts of Harmony, a small town just 20 miles north of Meadow Creek. The barn, long since dilapidated, was a local landmark, known for its crumbling silo and the eerie silence that clung to its weathered timbers. The scene, though different in location, bore an unsettling resemblance to Sarah Jenkins's discovery. Mark Miller, a man of considerable physical strength, lay sprawled on a pile of hay, his arms meticulously crossed over his chest. His usually vibrant, athletic frame was still, his eyes wide and vacant. The cause of death was, again, a single, precise stab wound to the heart. And just like Sarah, there was no sign of a struggle. But the similarities didn't end there. In Mark's clasped hands, a different handcrafted wooden animal. A small, intricately carved fox, its keen eyes seemingly observing the scene. And beside it, a single, perfectly pressed amber oak leaf. Detective Thorne, now with a team of state investigators, felt a cold dread seep into his bones. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a pattern. 2 victims, 2 different towns, but the same chilling signature. The meticulous staging, the absence of a struggle, the precise wound, the handcrafted wooden animal, and the single pressed leaf. The press, a swarm of eager reporters descending on these small, unprepared towns, christened him the Heartland Butcher. The name, though sensationalist, captured the brutal efficiency of the killings and the unsettling feeling that this monster was targeting the very heart of rural America. Thorne and his team worked tirelessly. They interviewed everyone who knew Sarah and Mark. They canvassed the areas, searching for any scrap of evidence, any witness, any fleeting glimpse of a shadow. The problem was, there was nothing. No forced entry, no footprints that didn't belong, no discarded weapons, no fingerprints. The killer was a ghost. The profiling unit, brought in from the FBI, painted a disturbing picture. This was a highly organized individual, intelligent, meticulous, and likely charming. Someone who could blend seamlessly into the background. The lack of a struggle suggested either a surprise attack, or, more disturbingly, a victim who willingly went with their killer, perhaps lured by a trusted face or a deceptive pretense. The gifts, the wooden animals, and the leaves were a chilling signature, perhaps a message, a ritualistic offering, or even a twisted form of respect for his victims. The changing animals and leaves suggested a theme, a progression, a story only the killer understood. The FBI profilers also hypothesized a cooling-off period, where the killer would meticulously plan their next move, savoring the aftermath of their gruesome acts. This meant that while the towns were in a panic, the killer was likely blending back into the rhythm of daily life, observing the chaos they had sown, perhaps even enjoying it. The fear, once localized to Meadow Creek and Harmony, began to spread like a prairie fire across the entire region. Towns, once proud of their low crime rates and their open-door policies, began to lock their doors at night. Strangers were met with wary glances. The close-knit communities, once a source of comfort, became hotbeds of suspicion. Detective Thorne found himself staring at a map, pins marking the locations of Sarah and Mark's bodies. Meadow Creek, Harmony, 2 points on a vast, seemingly random canvas. But he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that these were not random acts. There was a connection, a method to the madness. He just had to find it. The Heartland Butcher was out there, a shadow in the cornfields, and the whispers of his presence were growing louder, promising more terror to come. The calendar flipped to November, the days grew shorter, and the sense of impending doom settled over the Midwest like a shroud. The hunt for a phantom had just begun, and the stakes were higher than anyone could have imagined. The winter of 2007 to 2008 descended upon Iowa with a brutal efficiency, mirroring the chilling grip of fear that now held the state in its thrall. After the murders of Sarah Jenkins and Mark Miller, a tense silence settled over the region, punctuated only by the relentless hum of news cycles dissecting every angle of the Heartland Butcher case. Detective Thorne and his task force worked around the clock, fueled by caffeine and an unwavering determination to catch a ghost. Leads, however, were scarce and often led to dead ends, leaving the investigators frustrated and the public increasingly terrified. Then, just as the first delicate crocuses began to push through the thawing earth in March 2008, the butcher struck again. This time, the victim was 35-year-old Emily Dawson, a beloved kindergarten teacher in the town of Greenfield, a farming community roughly 50 miles west of Harmony. Emily was known for her infectious laugh and her dedication to her young students. Her absence from school on a Monday morning was immediately noticed, and a search party, already primed by the pervasive fear, quickly formed. Emily's body was discovered in a meticulously maintained rose garden behind the abandoned Greenfield Grange Hall. The Grange, a historical building that had once been the vibrant social hub of the town, now stood silent and decaying, a stark backdrop for the horror. Emily lay amidst the thorny bushes, a single, perfectly bloomed red rose placed delicately on her chest. Her long, dark hair was arranged in a halo around her head, and her hands, usually busy with finger paints and storybooks, were clasped together. The cause of death, as before, was a single, precise stab wound to the heart, and in her hands, a third handcrafted wooden animal. A small, graceful deer, its antlers intricately carved, its eyes fixed on some unseen point. Beside the deer, a single, perfectly pressed scarlet rose petal. The discovery sent a fresh wave of panic across the Midwest, ripping apart the fragile illusion that the winter lull had meant the killer had gone dormant, or perhaps even moved on. The Heartland butcher was back, and his audacity seemed to be growing. This time, the location was even more public, the victim more deeply embedded in the fabric of the community. A kindergarten teacher. The horror was almost unbearable. Detective Thorne, now looking more gaunt and weary, surveyed the scene with a profound sense of grim familiarity. 3 victims, 3 distinct towns, forming a rough triangle across central Iowa. Meadow Creek, Harmony, Greenfield. The geographical spread was unsettling, suggesting a killer with a wide range of movement, comfortable operating in multiple communities. The pattern was now undeniable, a chilling signature that tightened the noose of fear around the region. The precision of the wound, the absence of a struggle, the meticulous staging, the handcrafted wooden animal, and the pressed botanical specimen. But what did it all mean? The FBI profilers updated their assessment, their voices heavy with the weight of the escalating terror. The killer was becoming more confident, more daring. The choice of victims seemed to be evolving. Sarah, the quiet librarian. Mark, the community leader. Emily, the gentle teacher. All figures who embodied a certain innocence or foundational strength within their communities. Was there a theme? A message embedded in their identities? The wooden animals, too, were a point of intense speculation. A bird, a fox, a deer. All creatures of the wild, yet also present in the mythology and folklore of rural America. Were they symbols of the victims, or symbols for the killer himself? And the botanical specimens, a maple leaf, an oak leaf, a rose petal, did they signify seasons, or a deeper, more personal code? The public, increasingly desperate for answers, began to demand action. Local authorities, already stretched thin, were overwhelmed. The media spotlight intensified, casting a harsh glare on every misstep, every unanswered question. The pressure on Thorne and his team was immense, a constant, buzzing anxiety that permeated every waking moment. Thorne, however, was not easily swayed by public outcry. He focused on the details, the subtle shifts in the killer's method. The rose garden. Why there? Was it a personal connection, or simply an aesthetic choice? He tasked his team with a deep dive into the history of the Grange Hall, searching for any connection to Emily Dawson, or even to the previous victims. Nothing. The Grange, like the woods and the barn, seemed to be chosen for its isolated yet symbolically charged nature. The interviews in Greenfield yielded the same frustrating results as before. Emily was beloved, a paragon of kindness. No enemies, no dark secrets. Her last known movements were leaving school, heading home. She never made it. The assumption was, as with the others, that she had willingly accompanied her killer, or been expertly ambushed without a sound. The sheer cunning of this individual was almost unfathomable. Thorne kept returning to the geography. 3 towns forming a triangle. Could there be a fourth? So where? He had his team overlay maps, looking for patterns, for connections that might link these seemingly disparate locations. Was there a common highway? A shared resource? A specific demographic? Nothing immediately stood out. The killer seemed to relish the psychological impact of striking in different, yet equally vulnerable communities. The task force also focused on the handcrafted wooden animals. Forensics had determined they were all made by the same skilled hand, using similar tools and techniques. This was a craftsman, someone with patience and an eye for detail. The wood itself was common, locally sourced, making it difficult to trace. Thorne put out alerts to local craft stores, woodworking guilds, and online artisan communities, hoping to find someone who recognized the style, but the sheer volume of such artisans made the search a needle in a haystack. The spring wore on, and the fear in Iowa became a palpable entity. People stopped taking evening walks. Community events saw dwindling attendance. Small businesses struggled as people chose to stay home. The once vibrant heartland was succumbing to a creeping paralysis. Then, in late June, as the corn stood tall and green in the fields, the unimaginable happened. Not one but 2 victims. The bodies of 60-year-old Martha and 82-year-old Thomas Peterson, a quiet, elderly couple known for their prize-winning vegetable garden, were found in their farmhouse in Audubon, a small town 50 miles west of Greenfield. This was a brazen escalation, a home invasion. The sanctity of the home, a cherished ideal in rural America, had been violated. The Petersons were found side by side in their living room, Martha's hand gently holding Thomas's. They had been sitting in their rocking chairs, seemingly at peace, when the killer struck. 2 precise stab wounds, one for each, to the heart. The lack of struggle in a home invasion, especially against an elderly couple, was terrifying. It suggested a level of manipulation, or perhaps a terrifying silent efficiency. In Martha's hand, a meticulously carved wooden rabbit, its ears perked, as if listening. In Thomas's hand, a wooden owl, its eyes wide and wise, and scattered around them, a handful of perfectly pressed, delicate wildflower petals, a mix of purple coneflowers and yellow black-eyed Susans. The shock was immediate and profound. Couple. In their own home, the Heartland butcher had crossed a new, horrifying threshold. The scale of the investigation exploded. National media descended, broadcasting the terror across the country. The governor of Iowa made an impassioned plea, promising every resource to catch the killer. Thorne felt the weight of the world pressing down on him. 5 victims now. Couple. The killer was evolving, becoming more aggressive, more confident. The geographical spread was widening. Meadow Creek, Harmony, Greenfield, Audubon. The triangle was becoming a distorted polygon, pushing further west into the state. The profilers were now deeply concerned. The escalation, the shift to a home invasion, the double murder, it signaled a killer who was pushing boundaries, gaining a sense of omnipotence. The wooden animals continued their cryptic parade. A bird, a fox, a deer, a rabbit, an owl. Creatures of the forest and field, each with its own symbolic resonance. And the wildflowers, a subtle shift from single leaves and petals to a collection, perhaps signifying a different stage in the killer's twisted narrative. Thorne, in a moment of desperate inspiration, stared at the map. He connected the dots. Meadow Creek, Harmony, Greenfield, Audubon. He didn't see towns. He saw a path. A twisted, meandering path, perhaps following an obscure backroad or a forgotten route. But there was another connection, a more profound one, that was slowly forming in his mind. The victims on the surface seemed disparate. But what if they weren't? What if the killer was choosing them for something deeper, something hidden from the casual observer? He remembered a detail from the initial profiling report, a throwaway line about the possibility of a trophy or a ritual. The wooden animals, the pressed botanicals, they were more than just a signature. They were part of a story. A story the killer was meticulously crafting, one gruesome chapter at a time. Thorne felt a growing sense of dread, a chilling premonition that the seemingly random acts were, in fact, terrifyingly deliberate, and that the killer was building towards something grander, something even more devastating. The summer heat descended, but it offered no warmth to the terrified residents of Iowa. The Heartland butcher was a shadow in the sun-drenched fields, and the hunt for him had just entered its most desperate and terrifying phase. The summer of 2008 was a season of oppressive heat and even more oppressive fear across Iowa. The double murder of the Petersons had shattered any remaining illusion of safety, leaving communities large and small in a state of hypervigilance. Detective Marcus Thorne, now a familiar and grim face on national news, bore the weight of a state in terror. The Heartland butcher had become an almost mythical figure, whispered about in hushed tones. His shadow cast long over every quiet road and every cornfield. The task force, now greatly expanded and including federal agents, pored over every piece of evidence, every interview, every theory. The wooden animals, the pressed botanicals, they were the killer's cryptic signature, but their meaning remained elusive. The profilers were working on a deeper analysis of the symbolism, drawing connections to folklore, natural history, and even ancient rituals. They posited that the killer was likely a highly intelligent individual with a deep, perhaps obsessive, connection to nature and a strong sense of personal mythology. This wasn't just murder. It was a carefully constructed performance. Thorne, however, kept returning to the geography. Meadow Creek, Harmony, Greenfield, Audubon. He had overlaid every possible map, road maps, topographical maps, even historical maps of old Native American trails and early settler routes. There was no obvious pattern, no highway the killer was strictly following. But as he stared at the pins on the map, a different kind of pattern began to emerge, not geographical, but temporal. The first murder in October, the second in November, the third in March, the fourth and fifth in June. The killings were occurring in conjunction with significant natural or seasonal shifts. Late autumn, early winter, early spring, early summer. This wasn't a random serial killer. This was a deliberate, almost ritualistic execution, tied to the rhythms of the earth. This theory, while unsettling, provided a new lens through which to view the victims. Sarah Jenkins, the librarian, found as autumn ended. Mark Miller, the coach, as winter began. Emily Dawson, the teacher, as spring arrived. Martha and Thomas Peterson, the gardeners, as summer bloomed. Could the victims be chosen not just for their community roles, but for some subtle, symbolic connection to the seasons or to nature itself? Sarah, with her quiet, earthy demeanor. Mark, the strong, vital male. Emily, nurturing young life. The Petersons, tending to the growth of their garden. It was a tenuous link, but it was all Thorne had. The pressure to identify the wooden carver was immense. The FBI had engaged leading experts in woodworking and art history to analyze the craftsmanship, hoping to find a unique stylistic trait. They scoured online forums, art exhibitions, and local craft markets. But the killer's skill was both precise and, paradoxically, subtly generic enough to avoid immediate identification. Then, in early September, just as the first hints of autumn began to color the leaves, the butcher struck again. This time, the location was further north, in the small town of Decorah, nestled in the picturesque bluffs of northeastern Iowa. The victim was 22-year-old Danny Thorne, a talented local musician known for his haunting folk melodies and his gentle spirit. He was found by a group of hikers, deep in a secluded cave in the Decorah Ice Cave Preserve, a natural wonder renowned for its unique geological formations. Danny lay on a flat, cold slab of rock, his guitar carefully placed beside him. His long, dark hair fanned out, almost luminous in the dim light of the cave. The cause of death, inevitably, was a single, precise stab wound to the heart. And in his clasped hands, a magnificent wooden eagle, its wings spread wide, as if soaring. Beside it, a single, perfectly pressed, golden aspen leaf. The murder of Danny Thorne, coming after the terrifying double homicide, sent a wave of despair across the state. 6 victims. Danny's name resonated with a new kind of tragedy, a young artist, taken in the prime of his creative life, in a place of natural beauty that was now irrevocably tainted. The location, a cave, a place of ancient mystery and primal darkness, amplified the sense of dread. Detective Thorne felt a jolt when he heard the victim's name. No relation, thankfully, but the proximity of the surname was a chilling coincidence. He stood in the cave, the cold seeping into his bones, and felt a profound sense of foreboding. The eagle, the aspen leaf, the cave. It was all so deliberate, so theatrical. The FBI profilers confirmed Thorne's evolving theory. The killer was indeed operating on a complex, internal calendar, tied to the changing seasons and possibly to specific astronomical events. The choice of victims, they now believed, was not random but deeply symbolic to the killer. Each victim represented an archetype, a harvest of a particular aspect of life, linked to the seasonal cycle. Sarah, the innocent. Mark, the strong protector. Emily, the nurturer. The Petersons, the foundation of family and tradition. And now Danny, the artist, the free spirit, the voice of nature. The wooden animals, too, were now seen as part of this complex symbolism. The ground-dwelling bird, the cunning fox, the graceful deer, the home-loving rabbit, the wise owl, and now the soaring eagle. A progression, perhaps, from the earth to the sky, a journey through the natural world. Thorne remembered an obscure fact from a local history book he'd been reading, a tangential detail about the early settlers of the region, their reverence for the land, their reliance on the seasons, and their often superstitious beliefs about natural cycles. He also recalled tales of ancient earth cults and nature worship, elements often found in the folklore of various cultures. Could the killer be drawing inspiration from something far older, far deeper than simple serial murder? Then, a breakthrough not from forensics, but from an elderly woman named Agnes Miller, a retired history teacher from Decorah. She had seen the news, the description of the wooden eagle, and had remembered something from her youth. She called the tip line, her voice trembling but clear. "My father," she had said. "He was a master woodcarver. He taught a few apprentices back in the 60s and 70s. One of them, a quiet boy, always sketching in a little notebook. He loved carving birds of prey, eagles especially. And he always carried a book on local flora, pressing leaves and flowers between the pages. The name Agnes provided was Arthur Hemlock. He was, according to her, a recluse, a loner with a peculiar intensity. He had moved away from Decorah decades ago, and his whereabouts were unknown. But the name, Hemlock, resonated with a chilling irony, a poisonous plant. The task force went to work tracking down Arthur Hemlock. It was a painstaking process, relying on old records, dusty census reports, and fragmented memories. They finally located him in a remote, unassuming cabin deep in the Luss Hills of western Iowa, far from any major town, near a nature preserve. He lived off the grid, a ghost in the modern world. As Thorne and his team approached the cabin, a profound silence hung in the air, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the rustling of leaves. The cabin itself was unassuming, well-maintained but blend into the wilderness. No lights, no sounds. It was the perfect lair for a man who moved like a phantom. They entered cautiously, weapons drawn. The cabin, though small, was meticulously organized. Books on botany, folklore, and natural history lined the shelves. Maps of Iowa, meticulously annotated with circles around the very towns where the murders had occurred, were spread across a large, hand-carved wooden table. And in a corner, a workbench, littered with wood shavings, precise tools, and a collection of unfinished wooden animals, each one bearing the distinct, masterful hand of the Heartland butcher. An unfinished wooden wolf sat on the bench, its eyes carved with an eerie, almost intelligent, gaze. On the wall, a calendar, not a standard Gregorian one, but a complex, hand-drawn chart mapping the solstices, equinoxes, and lunar cycles. Each murder date was circled, annotated with the name of the victim, the animal, and the botanical specimen. It was a horrifying testament to the killer's meticulous planning and his warped, ritualistic worldview. And then they found him, not hidden, not fleeing. Arthur Hemlock, a man of perhaps 60, with piercing blue eyes and a shock of white hair, sat calmly in a hand-carved wooden chair, holding a small, perfectly carved wooden fawn. He looked up as Thorn entered, a slight, almost serene smile playing on his lips. There was no fear in his eyes, only a strange, detached satisfaction. "You took your time," he said, his voice surprisingly soft, almost melodic. "But you found me, just as the seasons decreed." Thorn felt a cold wave wash over him. This wasn't a confession. It was a pronouncement. "Why, Mr. Hemlock?" Thorn asked, his voice steady despite the turmoil within him. "Why these people? Why this horror?" Arthur Hemlock gently placed the wooden fawn on the table. "They were sacrifices," he said, his gaze drifting to the window, to the untouched wilderness beyond. "Offerings to the land, to the cycles. Each one a part of the harvest. The innocent, the strong, the nurturer, the providers, the free spirit. Each soul a vital thread in the tapestry of existence. I was merely the architect of the natural order, restoring balance, honoring the ancient ways." He gestured to the calendar on the wall. "The earth hungers, detective. The modern world forgets its debt. I simply reminded them." Thorn stared at the man, a chilling realization settling in. Arthur Hemlock wasn't insane in the conventional sense. He was a man consumed by a grandiose, meticulously constructed delusion, a self-appointed high priest of a deadly pagan religion of his own making. He believed he was an instrument of nature, not a serial killer. And his serene demeanor, his utter lack of remorse, was far more terrifying than any rage. As Arthur Hemlock was led away, the wooden eagle from Danny Thorne's body, the fox from Mark Miller's, the deer from Emily Dawson's, they were all laid out, silent witnesses to the twisted vision of a man who believed he was an artist of death, a guardian of the seasons. The hunt for the Heartland Butcher was over, but the scars he left on the heartland of America would remain, a chilling reminder of the darkness that can take root even in the most beautiful and seemingly tranquil places, a story woven into the very fabric of the land itself. The whispers had ceased, replaced by the somber echo of a profound and unforgettable horror.